Hi, I'm Phil Harbottle and this is my 8th video about the British science fiction paperbacks of the 1950s. Now we've seen how Vargo Stanton started the craze for science fiction paperbacks in the summer of 1950 when Scion released his first titles. This caused a stirring amongst these rival publishers and they wanted to get in on the act. And one of the first competitors off the mark was Hamilton and Company, and they quickly commissioned John Russell Fearn to write some novels for them. Here we see the 4-novel series, the Clay Drew of Mars series, published by Hamilton's in September 1950. But I don't propose to discuss them at this time because Guy Levisi has recently done a full video about them on his excellent YouTube channel. I'll likely return to them later to cover some of the points which Gary didn't touch on. But the significant fact is that the appearance of this series panicked Scion, the Vargo Stanton publishers. They were terrified of losing Fearn to a competitor. Scion's managing director, B.Z. Emanuel, travelled in person to Fearn's Blackpool home and persuaded the author to sign a 5-year contract to write science fiction novels exclusively for Scion as Vargo Stanton. Under the terms of his new contract, he couldn't write anything for any other UK publisher. This was a big blow for Hamilton's, who wanted to keep their science fiction line going. So the director, Harry Athiel, instructed his managing editor, Gordon Lansborough, to find replacement authors. Lansborough's background had been as a newspaperman, and he sought to improve the terrible standards at Hamilton's by recruiting newspaper journalists through advertisements in the trade journal The World's Press News. But at first he had no contact with indigenous British science fiction specialist writers. Here we see their early titles, which were a very mixed bag, if not a rag bag. Mushroom Men from Mars was as terrible as the title. It was by Lee Stanton, who was a pen name for a journalist called Richard Conroy. And it's a first novel as science fiction, his first novel of science fiction. It's absolutely terrible. So it got off to a bad start. Things improved with the second book, Reconnoiter Creleg 2 by John Deegan. It was a pen name for Robert Sharp. Now Sharp was an experienced crime fiction writer and he'd been writing books since the 1930s through the 40s, and he was a very good author. And this book here was the first in a series about interplanetary explorers, much along the lines of the much later Star Trek. And it was made good reading. However, Gold Men of Orius by Roy Sheldon, who was a house pseudonym, we don't know who the author is. He remains unidentified, and it's just as well, because this was a bloody awful book and I don't wish to discuss it, and any viewers should determine that they would never buy it. It's not worth it. It was rotten. Things improved by back to John Deegan, Robert Sharp's Old Growler. But the next title, Seven to the Moon, was again by Richard Conroy under his Lee Stanton pseudonym, and that was a very poor book as well. Phantom Moon by Roy Sheldon wasn't the same Roy Sheldon as the earlier terrible book. And at first nobody knew who it was, but this started a series of 2 spacemen, Shiny Spear and Dirk Manners, and it was a good interplanetary adventure, action-packed romp, so it was fairly interesting. Shiny Spear and Dirk Manners again appeared in the 7th novel, Energy Alive, and that wasn't as good as the other one because it was over-ambitious. But it was all right. Now then, when we came to World in a Test Tube, number 8, that was by a real author, Herbert James Campbell. And this was a very good book. And when I read that, I realised that this author had actually written the Shiny Spear series as well. So this Roy Sheldon and that Roy Sheldon were pseudonyms for the new author here, H.J. Campbell. Now that was followed by a change in the titling. Previously it had been called Science Fiction Fortnightly, but after the 8th novel they realised that they couldn't keep up the schedule of publishing a book a fortnight, so the title at the bottom changed to Science Fiction Monthly. And Old Growler and Orbis was another good Deegan. Number 10, Man, Woman and Android, was by a new author, a real person, George Hay. And this was a very good novel indeed. George Hay later founded the academic organisation, the Science Fiction Foundation, and did much to introduce academic study of science fiction in Britain. So he was an important writer, and this is an interesting first novel. Then there was another Campbell book, The Last Mutation, and this was an interesting one because it was about a mutant Superman, a super intelligent man. But like all Superman stories in science fiction, he doesn't have a very happy life and he comes to a sad end. The last book we see here, 10 Years to Oblivion by Clem McCartney, he was another journalist recruit, and I'm afraid it was 10 seconds to oblivion. After you'd read the book, you would completely forget about it. It was very forgettable and it wasn't very good. Now then, the recruitment of H.J. Campbell to Hamilton's ranks was to be a game changer because he was a trained scientist with a string of academic achievements to his name, and Lansbury quickly engaged him as his technical advisor and assistant editor. We can see from this New Worlds advert for the White Horse Pub from the May 1952 issue of New Worlds that H.J. Campbell, the bearded figure in this photograph, was a regular attendee at the White Horse. We had access to all of the London science fiction writers, and he would become a friendly rival of editor John Cornell. Now it was just as well that he was able to get all the writers in the pub, because Lansbury and Campbell received a new director from their publisher. Science Fiction Monthly was to be renamed as Authentic Science Fiction from number 13 and was to be promoted and presented as a magazine rather than just a paperback novel. They were to add extra articles, features and book reviews to the reader's letter column. In 1970, I met Gordon Lansbury in London, and he told me the reason for the change. Hamilton's had learned that a rival publisher, Atlas, was now selling 40,000 copies a month of their British reprint edition of the American magazine, Astounding Science Fiction. This had actually been reprinted in England since the war in 1939, and this issue we see here is the March 1940 issue. It was a fairly complete reprint of the American original, but it did miss out several stories, and in particular it missed out most of the illustrations. But by the early 1950s, when paper shortages were easing, the American edition was virtually identical to the British edition. You can see from the contents panel here that in fact it was a complete reprint. Just the odd article was missing, but all the stories and all the illustrations were in place. So this magazine was very successful, and it was reputedly selling 40,000 copies a month. So the publishers, Hamilton's, they wanted to get in on the act. They wanted to produce a magazine. Hence the change to authentic science fiction from number 13. Beam of Terror was another shiny space adventure by Campbell. Planet of Power was another in the Old Growler series. Report from Mandezo was a bit of a potboiler from the slowly improving Richard Conroy. The Moon is Heaven by Campbell was an amusing satire on the first voyage to the moon, with Arthur C. Clarke thinly disguised as one of the characters. And The Coming of the Dracula was another good story by the reliable F.G. Rear. Chaos in Miniature number 18 was another Campbell satire featuring thinly disguised prominent science fiction fans as characters, such as Walter Willis. But it wasn't quite as good a story as the earlier one about the moon and Arthur C. Clarke. Space Warp. Oh God, this was the last truly dreadful novel to appear in Authentic by an unknown author. It's a shocker. Whatever you do, don't buy it. Number 20, Earth Our New Eden, was another good story by F.G. Rear, but the big improvement in Authentic came with number 21. Alien Impact was E.C. Tubb writing under his own name for the first time. And this was an exceptionally good story with strong characterization and human interest. Now, about the same time, the payment rate for covers was raised from 9 guineas to 15 guineas, and this attracted the brilliant new artist Gordon C. Davies. Mice and Machines, another Campbell story, moderately good, with a splendid Davies cover. And Davies did another cover for The Singing Spheres, number 23, as Old Growler continued its interstellar explorations. Now, Aftermath by Brian Berry was a really excellent novel. It was so strong a story that the publisher was able to sell it to a leading American magazine for £300, whilst his author was not informed of this sale and received nothing more than his original flat fee of £35. That's the Mushroom Publishers for you. The Plastic Peril, number 25, introduced another artist new to Authentic, the excellent artist John Pollock, who was obviously attracted by the increased payment for covers for this Shiny Spear adventure. Martians in a Frozen World was next at number 26, with another nice Pollock cover, and it was the best Richard Conroy novel to date, but that's not saying too much, of course. Star of Death was another Shiny Spear story, again illustrated by Gordon Davies. And the last novel, number 28, with Cast No Shadow, was by F.G. Rear. It wasn't terribly good, a bit of a potboiler, but it was certainly up to the usual Authentic standard. Now, from number 26, the number of pages was increased from 112 to 128 pages, and it had a new 6-part serial by experienced science fiction writer Sidney J. Bounds, Frontier Legion. It ran for 3 issues, and then it was concluded in issues 29, 30, and 31. But the pocketbook series, the novel series, ended with number 28. From 28 onwards, there was extra short stories and features, and the magazine increased in size to 144 pages. It was very successful in its new format, and the circulation was to rise from 20,000 to 30,000 copies over the following year. And although the lead novel was eventually reduced to a novelette, the magazine continued to be successful for several years. Now, unfortunately, Sidney Bounds' first short novel, which was serialized, was fated never to be reprinted in his lifetime. But the good news is that in 2017, I included it as the lead story in a new collection of nine stories of Sidney J. Bounds. And this is available as an attractive paperback, as you can see, published by Endeavour Press, now rebranded as Loon Books. Now then, since to collect all of the 6 issues of Authentic to get the Bounds story would cost you around £60, and the Loon Books edition is only £6, it's an absolute bargain. Now, if this video has interested you in this history of authentic science fiction, I did a fuller article in the magazine Paperback Parade, Guy Levise's American magazine, number 90. And this is a slap-up article all about authentic. There's all the covers, which we've seen, but I had much more detailed commentary about the history of the magazine and the editors and so forth. So there's a more detailed story. So that's that. Now, it's important to note that although Hamilton's had ceased their paperback novels with number 28, they did in fact continue the series with all of the regular writers now writing for Panther books, the new Hamilton imprint. And there we can see Roy Sheldon and so forth, and John J. Deegan, the regular authors for the pocketbook, for the paperback series, were now writing for Panther pocketbooks. And this was would develop further over the next few years into a very interesting series, and that's the subject of future videos.